Mr. Davies.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. And we go to Dr. Eyolfson.
Thank you, ministers, all for coming. Now, Minister Goodale, I take to heart particularly what you say about how we need to address the criminal gang problem. I practiced emergency medicine in Winnipeg for almost 20 years and was intimately familiar as to why we were the murder capital of Canada. I quite frankly lost count of the number of bullet wounds and stab wounds I treated, the vast majority of those due to the illegal drug trade, and most of that being cannabis. So I thank you, and I appreciate the statistics that you were able to quote from Washington and Colorado about the market share that has gone down from the illegal market due to the legalization. Now, another big public safety issue, again, that I became intimately familiar with was impaired driving in all of its forms. We know that, as you said, that this is something that's going on. This, legalization isn't going to create this. We know it's happening. Do we have any data right now as to the prevalence of people who today are driving impaired on cannabis? And I don't mean accident victims who simply the presence was found, but simply data on collisions and prevalence due to impaired driving due to cannabis.
I don't have those statistics right with me this evening, but if I could, this might be of interest to all members of the committee. I will ask my officials to prepare a summary of statistically what we do know at the present time of drug impaired versus alcohol impaired, and I would send that back to the committee just as soon as we're able to compile that arithmetic.
Okay, certainly. Thank you. Now, in Colorado, we heard testimony that what they thought was an apparent spike in cannabis impaired driving was actually due to improved detection methods, as opposed to an increased actual incidence. Will this legislation and its provisions that are coming out of it in law enforcement, will they help to better detect and track impaired driving due to cannabis?
They will for two. The legislation, particularly Bill C-46, which is the companion piece, the legislation will assist in that regard in two ways. First of all, it will introduce new roadside screening equipment that will be more helpful in providing preliminary information about potential drug impairment, and then lead to more specific testing at the police station with blood samples. So the equipment will help for more accurate information, as well as greater training. Part of the money that I referred to in my remarks will go toward training more sobriety field testing officers who have the skill set necessary to identify situations at the roadside. At the moment, there are, roughly speaking, 3,500 of those officers properly trained across the country at various levels of police forces. Our objective is essentially to double that number over the course of the next 18 months to 2 years. And we're also aiming to increase substantially, by at least 50%, the number of drug recognition experts. These are people who are pre-qualified as experts in detecting drug-related issues and then testifying to that effect in court. There are now, roughly speaking, 500 of them in the country. We would want to see that number go up to at least 750, obviously distributed across the nation. So providing the better equipment and providing larger numbers of properly trained officers, either in the field or at headquarters in the police stations, that will certainly enable us to be more precise in future in respect of tracking the issue and quantifying the issue.
All right, thank you. Now, one of the other concerns that's brought up is regarding our provisions for allowing growing up to 4 plants in the home. I know we have a lot of assumptions on it. We don't know how common it's going to be. It is apparently a very difficult and labor-intensive plant to grow, or so I've heard. And but again, there's many assumptions. We had a member from one of the police departments say what would happen to a 200-unit apartment block if half the units had 4 plants. But when I asked him, what makes you think that you would see this, I got the response, and I quote, "I don't have the facts to back that up." That being said, do we have any idea as to, under the conditions we have, how big a problem this will be, or how common this will be, and do we have any federal legislation that would restrict how many plants you could grow if the owners of a multi-dwelling unit wanted to ban it? Like, is there a federal law that would say you can't grow this in apartment blocks?
Well, I mean, in terms of federal laws, I mean, there's we're going to continue to work with the provinces and territories, and particularly work with municipalities. There be an implication with respect to residential tenancy and all of the different interconnections with respect to different jurisdictions and different orders of government's laws. So we'll continue to work with our counterparts in that regard. In terms of the scenario that you talked about, an apartment building, this was discussed at great length by the task force, as you know, and the restriction of 4 plants was in part a recognition of having an overabundance of production of plants could lead to the concerns that are raised with major grow-up operations that happen in buildings. So restricting the number of plants prevents those negative consequences, certainly.
All right, thank you.
Time's up.